popular traction. But regardless of that, this concept is multifold, it has multiple layers, and it originates from our social structure, our society. What we have felt in the popular perception and also in our individual experiences. I will speak from the institutional perspective and institutional point of view that whether consciously or unconsciously, we tend to somehow fall in the trap of caste denialism or caste blindness. A large segment of the so-called upper class, upper caste sections in academics, in institutions, in places where decision making matters, they somehow tend to follow this factor of caste denialism. We have to be mindful of the fact, we have to accept the fact that caste today is a social reality. Whether we like it or not, we must acknowledge that caste remains one of the very important or rather cultural or civilizational fault line of our society. And there is no problem in admitting this. This is the reality. A preliminary reading of history, analysis of our sociology would tell you that the sort of social stratification that has happened over the course of decades, it has led to the fragmentation, it has led to power being locked at certain positions, power did not percolate, and somehow the institutions of power and patronage did not allow access to people from lower caste, people from different varnas. There should be no problem in admitting and acknowledging this fact. The issue today which we are facing, the problem is that we see simplification or rather oversimplification of caste issues. Whenever we speak of caste issues, polarization is bound to happen. There is a massive debate happening in the United States of America over the Black Lives Matters. But if you look at it academically, it is telling at many levels. I would like you to go back 5 or 6 decades and tell me hypothetically, if not for aggressive political posturing or manipulation of LBJ, Lyndon B. Johnson, would it have been possible for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to push civil rights reforms in the United States political system or not? I would like you to take back to another 100 years. The line of social reform movements that has happened over the time, be it Rajaram Mohan Roy, Savitribai Phule, and multiple others, which I will talk in the due course of my presentation. You cannot look at this issue in silos. You cannot isolate yourself and look at it with your preconceived notions. Whenever there has been a problem, efforts have been made from all the directions to resolve the problem and reach to a consensus which is acceptable for all. Like I said previously, whether we like it or not, caste remains a social reality and that stares us on our face every day and is prominent every morning in the matrimonial sections of the newspapers. It has not disappeared. I urge you to study the subaltern movement, not after the independence, but of the last 100 years, last 150 years. You will come across a lot of social reform movements which were led by non-backwards, non-Dalits, people from upper caste, people from intermediary caste. I don't know how many of you are aware of a woman saint poet, or probably the first Dalit woman saint poet who goes with the name of Kallave. Kalave, friends, was a contemporary of Basavanna. Basavanna was a saint, a social reformer who initiated the Lingayat movement. Friends, Kallave critiqued the orthodox Brahminical traditions and the caste system that was striving and thriving at that time. You look at Savitribai Phule, the first lady teacher of our country, Jyotiba Phule, who gave out lands for making schools for the purpose of giving education to the socially marginalized communities. You look at Narayan Guru, Ayankali, Chokha Mela, Soyarabai, the list is endless. People who have fought the social challenges that was there and came out with a sense of integration, with a sense of cultural assimilation. It's very crucial. Apart from cultural and civilizational battles, I would also like to tell you about the struggles of Sardar Udham Singh, Mata Din Bhangi, Jhalkari Bai. I'm not sure how many of you have heard these names, but these are freedom fighters who sacrificed, who made the supreme sacrifice for the sake of the nation, for the independence. This tells us that Dalits have been at the forefront of battles for culture, civilization, and the nation. It's very important. Whether we like it or not, this is something which is the reality. A lot of you might not might find the use of the term Dalit confusing because there are different terms you, you denote to this group. If you look at historically, the terms which have been attributed were Achut, Chandal, Shudra, during the freedom movement, depressed classes, Mahatma Gandhi used Harijan, and finally, in the modern context, Dalit and Bahujan. So, this is how a term traverses different periods of time. It's very critical. But when you speak of something like subaltern Hindutva, it's very important to read about the life of the leaders who came from this community and made the supreme sacrifice for the nation, for the culture, for the civilization. Friends, politics today depends upon creation and manipulation of identities. It's not only today, but that is how politics has been. In this process, communities tend to identify icons. Who were the main Dalit icons after the independence? Ambedkar, undoubtedly. Ambedkar was someone who unfortunately was attributed as a leader of the depressed classes. I'm sure, as a student of law, as an enthusiast, you would have studied the different works of Ambedkar, different speeches of Ambedkar. It's a great disservice to the soul of Baba Sahib Ambedkar to restrict his vast personality only as a leader of the subaltern classes, the leader of the depressed communities. Why was this done? Who did this? Unfortunately, a section of academics who probably wanted to propagate the legacy of single family, they ended up diluting the legacy of such tall leaders. They restricted their intellectual colossus into one single small bracket. I have another name which I would like you to talk about. Babu Jagjeevan Ram. I'm not sure how many of you have heard the name of Babu Jagjeevan Ram. Coming from the Dalit community in a remote village from Bihar, Babu Jagjeevan Ram has his name in the Limca Book of World Records. He has a record to his name, friends. He never lost a single electoral battle in his entire life. He has had a long parliamentary innings, more than 4 decades, almost 5 decades, and the record is still there on his name. Here is the man who goes on to become the deputy prime minister of the country. If you remember the 1971 war, the war was also sui generis in its own terms. Never before in the history of humankind, any war has led to a birth of a nation. It has either broken nations, fragmented nations, but for the first time in the history of humankind, a nation was born out of a war. And that was the 1971 war, which led to the creation of Bangladesh. At that crucial war, which was a very critical point in the history of independent India, Babu Jagjeevan Ram was the Minister for Defense, and Gary Bass, who was a diplomat at the Dhaka US Embassy, he has written a book. He has written a book by the name of The Blood Telegram. And Mr. Gary Bass, who is still alive, he calls Babu Jagjeevan Ram the most hawkish defense minister. So why are we not aware of these people who came from Dalit community but left an indelible mark? They have had a remarkable political life, but we are unfortunately not aware of these names. Is it out of a design? Is it due to an agenda? Was it possible due to a propaganda? Apparently, the political party that has been in power for the majority of the times after independence has been the Congress party. And the way Congress party treated the leaders coming from Dalit community is nothing but deplorable. I can give you a number of other names apart from Baba Sahib Ambedkar, Babu Jagjeevan Ram, to present day as well. Only a couple of days ago, I was looking at the organizational reshuffle of the Congress party, and there was only a single Dalit who is there. So, a community which has almost 20 crore population in the entire country, the grand old party finds only one person from that community to be as one of the key stakeholders in the party. This is something which is very telling of a conscious casteism that is practiced by this party. On the other hand, what we saw in the course of political evolution, especially when we speak of social justice politics, many parties came up. They promised space for subaltern community. But in the course of last 2-3 decades, we realized that be it RLD, RJD, SP, and other fractions of Janata Party, they became family-centric political parties. So this idea of social justice was up for grabs. Who is going to occupy the, or probably find a space in the imagination of the subaltern communities? That was something which is very critical. Now here comes the BJP. If you look at the trajectory of the BJP has remained the only political party who has made a Dalit its national president, Bangaru Lakshman. It was BJP-led NDA that made GMC Balyogi the first Dalit Speaker of Lok Sabha. It was BJP-led government that made a Dalit the first President of India. There is dispute over the social origin of K.R. Narayanan. As your law student, you would know a Dalit Christian, whether they fall in this category or not, the case is going on. So, this idea of Subaltern Hindutva, it actually originated with the idea of politics taking shape in the Hindi heartland and parts of South India as well. Unless and until you give representation to the socially marginalized communities in the organizational hierarchy of your party, you won't be able to capture the imagination of these communities. That was one important indication. Now, when we speak of subaltern Hindutva, it's very important that we also mention the Ram Temple. If you look at the movement of Ram Temple and the people who actually led that movement, Kalyan Singh, Uma Bharti, Vinay Katiyar, Sadhvi Niranjan, these people came from OBC communities, Bahujan community. Majority of them were not forward caste, so-called forward caste or upper caste. So this is also telling at many levels. When the Shilanyas happened, Kameshwar Chopal, a Dalit, laid the first brick for Ram Temple in 87-88. What do we make of it? How do we reconcile with it? Because the popular narrative that is being constantly fed in our minds is diametrically opposite to what I am seeing. Atrocity literature. People with agenda, academicians with a propaganda, they harp on this. I'm not at all saying or maintaining that caste related issue does not exist. Caste related problem exists, and we need to just look at the Ministry of Home Affairs website, National Crime Records Bureau data, where we see constant increase in the number of atrocities when it comes to Dalits being at the receiving end. But where does the solution lie? After the 4-5 decades of independence, when there was a single party dominance in the political structure, the problem did not wane away. The problem did not disappear. So how do you make Dalits equal and relevant stakeholder in the growth story of the country? How do you give them position, a sense of dignity, a sense of respect at the institutions that matters? You look today, media, judiciary, civil society, bureaucracy, you'd be surprised to know that there has been no Dalit cabinet secretary or foreign secretary till now. Cabinet secretary is supposedly the topmost position in the Indian bureaucracy. Foreign secretary similar goes for the foreign affairs department. It tells you that for the last 7 decades, this problem has become systemic and inherent. How do we get rid of it? Who has to play an important role for it? Apart from politics, we need to get a hold of cultural and civilizational understanding of this as well. In my interaction with Dr. Kaushal Pawar, who is again a Dalit feminist professor at the Delhi University, I was talking to her about the Ram Temple and the role of Dalits. She said that Dalits have been the cultural soldiers of our civilization. From Ramayana, she takes an incident and tells me about the Shabri incident. When Lord Ram was in his Vanvas, he comes face to face with an old tribal lady who was living in a dilapidated house eating berries. Ram proceeds towards her in spite of the resistance by his brother Lakshman and shares the fruit and engages with the woman like an equal. Dr. Pawar says that this clearly is indicative of the deep-rooted respect for the subaltern communities in the holy scriptures. Shabri incident is one incident. There is Nishad Raj incident, and there is Chhapko incident. Out of many versions of Ramayana, you can choose your own version, but the Tulsidas Ramayana or the Valmiki Ramayana, the incident of Chhapko is also mentioned. Chhapko used to be a maid in the house of Ram. When she was not coming, Lord Ram got worried and goes to her house and spends a week with her until she was fine and healthy. So these incidents are threads of integration that exist, that have existed since times immemorial. There are many such stories in the rural parts of India that have great semblance to the marginalized section of our society. I'm sure you would have known or read about Kabir. Kabir has a massive following, not only among the upper caste Hindus, but also among the OBCs, SCs, and ST communities in North and East India. Kabir, in one of his typical prose, says Kabira Kutta Ram ka, मोतिया मेरा नाम गले राम की जेवरी जित खेचे तित जाऊं. Such is the dedication of Kabir towards Lord Ram. I would urge you to do some research about the Ram Nami Society. There is a beautiful short documentary, I think is a 6-minute musical documentary made on the Ram Nami Samaj. Friends, it's very important for us to know about the Ram Nami Society. Being from the socially marginalized category, they were denied access to temples, access to the places of worship. What they did, they tattooed the name of Ram all over their body and they said that our body is the place of our worship. These are some of the eternal examples from which we cannot run. These are some of the realities that have existed. How do we make sense of it? It's very critical. Another glaring example is the Kanwad Yatra. Kanwad Yatra, we would know in the major parts of North India, the Yatra exposes the glaring falsehood in the atrocity narrative. The atrocity narrative imagines Dalits and Muslims in the same category of perpetual victimhood. You must be aware of the fact that over the last 7 decades, Dalits have been treated as a political commodity and as someone who must be patronized. The institutions of power that perpetuated hierarchy and oppressions were closely guarded by microscopic section of political elites. And needless to say, it was aided by academics as well. You should know that Dalits in Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, and elsewhere in the northern India are fearlessly celebrating the culture and festivities associated with those regions. In one of my articles, I have advocated for a demographic analysis of people who undertake the Kanwad Yatra. You would realize that these are people who are coming from the backward communities. The scholars or the activists who continue to study the dominance of Hindu religiosity and the rise of Hindutva as antithetical to Dalit communities. Very important point, friends. Please pay attention to it. My fundamental hypothesis is that Dalits are assertive Hindus. They are probably more Hindus than your upper caste Hindus. They're at the forefront of celebrating festivals like Chhat in Bihar. Paradoxically, the so-called neo-Dalit intellectuals deride them for their enthusiasm and participation and end up becoming rebels without a cause. It's a very crucial point that I am trying to make here, friends. Whatever is being made in the think tanks, in the liberal universities, that Dalits and Muslims are same. For that matter, as law students, you would know the Citizenship Amendment Act. It was said in rhetoric that it is anti-Muslim, it is anti-Dalits. I fail to understand. It had no implications for the citizens of the country. I'll tell you a brief story about Jogendra Nath Mandal. Jogendra Nath Mandal, a Dalit, was the first law minister of Pakistan. He went there in the belief of that we are going to weave a positive narrative of togetherness of Dalits and Muslims. But you won't believe, he wrote a letter, a 48-page letter of resignation, wherein he has mentioned that the amount of atrocities that were meted on Dalits by the elite Muslims were horrific. From the CAA, the largest amount of beneficiaries were from the Dalit community, be it from the Meghwal Samaj, the Bhil community, the Valmiki community, and so on and so forth. I urge, unless of being or falling in the trap of rhetoric, we must do our own research. We must have a sense of purpose while we are reading these crucial issues that is very critical for our culture, our society, our civilization, and our nation. Now, this was our cultural and civilizational part. I'll speak to you about the context of subaltern Hindutva in terms of Indian politics. Today, the largest number of elected representatives from Dalit communities are from one single party, that is the BJP. In one of my articles, I have written that the 2019 phenomenal victory was the rise of Hindutva 2.0. What is Hindutva 2.0? Hindutva 2.0 is culturally diverse and socially inclusive. The BJP with this victory re-established the massive expansion of Hindutva base from the below. The coming together of OBCs and Dalits in favor of the BJP will have long-term implications. Should realize that Dalits were tired of family-based political parties. There were no scope of growth or development in those political parties. So somehow, for greener pastures, for sense of dignity, for better positions of growth, these people explored opportunities in the so-called nationalist parties. And it is today that after 7 decades of independence, the transfer of power, or rather the percolation of power, has somehow happened. And it has now up for grabs. When I say it's up for grabs, I say that Dalits are now negotiating for themselves. They don't want to be mere political commodity. They want to be an equal stakeholder in the growth story of the country. I'll tell you about the DICCI initiative, Dalit Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry. It is led by Padma Shri Milind Kamble, who is a Pune-based Dalit entrepreneur. In 2005, he started DICCI, DICCI, which goes with the name of Dalit Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry. Friends, it's a group, it's a conglomerate of Dalit intellectuals, Dalit entrepreneurs. small, medium, large scale entrepreneurs. Some of them having their turnovers of more than 1,000 crores. Because there were chambers of commerce and industry for people from trading communities. You had Confederation of Indian Industry, you have FICCI, you have ASSOCHAM, and so on and so forth. But Mr. Milind Kamble realized that we need a separate body for Dalits and tribals. So he came up with this revolutionary idea of DICCI. And you would be happy to know that DICCI today has more than 5,000 members across 30 states. And how do you support through network? As students of law, you would realize the immense value that any network has to offer. There is a small book by Professor R. Vaidyanathan, who is a professor of finance at Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. The name of the book is Caste as a Social Capital, where he makes a very strong case, a very strong argument that how caste plays a very crucial role in terms of your entrepreneurial growth and development. He mentions about one community, the Palanpur Jains, and how Palanpur Jains have occupied or influenced more than 80% of the global trade on diamonds, be it cutting of diamonds, trading of diamonds, marketing, and so on. So, how being born in a particular caste gives you access to market, access to skill-based workforce, access to credit, and so on. How the atmosphere is such, it's something which is very critical. All of us, as students of law, must try to have an independent, objective, and rational understanding of caste. We must not fall in the trap of equating caste issues with reservations. Somehow we see people say, oh, he's going to speak about caste, so he is going to speak about reservation, so let's not indulge with him. Reservation was only a constitutional policy aimed at the upliftment and welfare of the groups of people who were left behind because of many exclusionary practices in the history. So we must not make this cardinal mistake of equating these two together. So I think it's very crucial that we must evolve with changing times and circumstances. And as students of law, it's very important for you to have a multidisciplinary approach, multidisciplinary understanding of issues from both the sides, to have a ringside perspective as well. I am myself a teacher of law. I teach law at Patna University. Although I have had education in the premier institutions of the country, I consciously made that choice to come back to my homeland and have a sense of roots. 2 years ago, when I joined Patna University, I was surprised, and you would be surprised to know, that the hostels in the universities were and are still divided on the basis of caste. There is an Ambedkar hostel where majority of the students, at times 100% of the students, are from scheduled caste categories. There is a Patel Chhatravas where 100% of the students are from Kurmi caste or community. There is a Saidpur Chhatravas where 100% of the students are from one particular upper caste. I'm talking of 21st century India. So I'm happy that in spite of being in one of the most premier institutions, all of you who have joined this conversation, all of you who have joined this discussion, have sort of made an effort have made an attempt to understand the realities of our society, the realities of our country. We are a diverse nation, friends. We don't have one reality. We don't have one version of truth. There are many truths. And the idea is to take everyone along. Once Jawaharlal Nehru said to a media person that democracy is the second best alternative to governance. That media man asked, what is the first best? He said it is yet to be discovered. So, we are a work in progress. Barack Obama became the President of the United States only recently. We had a person from Dalit community writing our constitution and essentially leading the sort of foundation that will eventually grow into multiple laws that will govern our society and the nation. I would like to summarize my presentation because I think the time is coming. The three foundational documents that guides us as a culture, as a civilization and as a nation, the Mahabharata, the Ramayana and the Constitution of India. You look at the authorship of these three documents. Mahabharata was written by sage Ved Vyas, who in today's context would come in the scheduled caste category. Ramayana was written by Valmiki, who in today's context will come in your scheduled caste category. The Constitution of India, was written by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. So, in our pursuit of knowledge, in our pursuit of awareness, we should not get blinded by what we read, by what we are being fed. We should always have some space in our mind for some alternate ideas so that we can debate, discuss what I have said in the course of my 45-50 minutes of presentation. I might be mistaken. I'm not infallible. But that is what an academic is supposed to do. That is what a student, a researcher is supposed to do. So I think with this, I would end my presentation and I would again extend my heartfelt gratitude to the organizers, to Mr. Sayan, to Animesh, to Yashuvardhan for giving me such a wonderful opportunity to interact with the bright young minds of OP Jindal Global University. And we have time for a couple of questions, observations. Please feel free to shoot. If you have a couple of questions, I'll take both of them together and then I'll finally address them and then conclude. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for such a detailed presentation and beautiful insights. I hand over the forum to Professor Shai Mukherjee, who is faculty coordinator. He'll be moderating the questions. Professor Shai.
Professor Guru Prakash, thank you for this wonderful lecture. And you would probably be happy to know when at the first time when we started the Indic Studies Society, our logo used to be a face from the Ramnami Society, a very old man's face with Ram Nam written all over his face. But later what happened, the students didn't really recognize what exactly was being told, so we changed it to a more commercial, more receptive kind of a, more understandable kind of a logo. I mean, even Arindam, the student coordinator, was not there at the time when we started this. Anyway, so my first question, so one of the very important thing that you have mentioned here is about the economic aspiration. So one is, of course, you have talked about the, finding space in the political hierarchies. That's definitely of importance, but also the economic aspirations of the subaltern communities. And that is where I think that the movement for the socioeconomic rights of the subaltern communities can never come in consonance with the cultural program of the Indian left. So because I think that, I mean, my observation is that it is through industrialization, it is by changing the established feudal modes of production by capitalist means, we can actually bring about, economic justice vis-a-vis social justice with respect to the socioeconomic rights of the, and the biggest example that we have in front of us from the place that I am from is the Namasudra movement in Bengal, which basically happened because Bengal became industrialized at the time of the British. And there are examples throughout Bengali literature as to how it happened. So can you please elucidate on that as to how the economic program of the left and the economic aspirations of the subaltern communities do not match or perhaps match?
Is there more question or?
So would you take the questions together or?
Yeah, I'll take the questions together.
Okay, okay. So the next question is Yashovardhan, then Pritha, and then somebody who goes by the name 20JGLS. I don't know your name, so you can shoot.
Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, sir. And I mean, it's genuinely a difficult topic to address because this is an idea that is very recent, and I think as far as I've observed, very few people have picked it up till now, including you, Abhinav, Prakash, and Sajan sir, obviously. So my main my question was regarding the kind of social engineering that is happening during this movement. So most of the educated people fail to understand that subaltern Hindutva is actually a revolutionary or a radical movement. And it's especially radical in the sense that if you see at the Savarkarite element of it, it aims at total eradication of the caste system. So I have certain doubts regarding it, which is that if the very basis of the Indic civilizational organization, or should I say the very basis of social formation is eradicated, which is the caste system and which has been in place for the entire period, what exactly will this social engineering lead us to? In the sense that what would be the new basis of social formation that subaltern Hindutva aims at or has in its imagination? So yeah, that's mainly what I wanted to know.
Pritha, you next.
Hi, so my question was that you said in your lecture that we have to look at the data and that CA has in fact benefited many Dalit communities as opposed to what the common narrative is. So I would like to know where to get this data, because most of the data that like it's not data yet because CA has not full-fledgedly been in force yet, or NRIC, but obviously the CAA cannot in itself be seen as an isolated act. It has to be taken with the NRIC, and with that what may happen actually is that a lot of people who do not have access to documentations, like the tribals or from people from the backward community, may fall short of the necessities that they might have to produce in order to prove that they are citizens. So how do we reconcile the two? And where do we find the data that you were talking about?
Okay, so there's Professor Prakash, there's just another question by student. So his mic is not working, so I'm reading the question for him. So the question is, how do you respond to the idea that Dalits are being co-opted into what is still a Brahmanical imagination of society? How do you respond to the idea that Dalits are being co-opted into what is still a Brahmanical imagination of society? While some members of the Dalit community surely might benefit from it, there is increasing systemic violence against them. There is increasing systemic violence against them, seen through countless practices such as lynch mob attacks, which is a similarity between Dalits and Muslims, by the way, justifying their sense of solidarity with each other. So that is the question. How do you respond to the idea that Dalits are being co-opted into what is still a Brahmanical imagination of the society? He doesn't define what is a Brahmanical imagination of the society, but that is the question.
Thank you so much, Sayanji. And I'm happy to know that you had Ram Nami as your logo, something which is very cultural and inclusive. And that short movie link that I mentioned, I think someone has posted in the messages. Coming to your question on how do we tap on the economic aspirations. So, Professor Devesh Kapoor in University of Pennsylvania, he has done a book on black, not a book, but he has a phenomenal work on black capitalism. And he was in India once, and Mr. Milind Kamble asked him that how do you get a black man in the White House? So he made a very strong case. He said during the 1920s and 1930s in the United States, a group started which advocated for black capitalism. It's a long drawn process. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen in a year. It doesn't happen in a decade. So you have to create 100 business Obamas to put one black man in the White House. 100 business Obamas were one Barack Obama. I'm sure a lot of us would have seen the movie In Pursuit of Happiness. It's a beautiful movie. It's a story of a person from colored background who goes and make a mark in the Wall Street. If you look at it from the Indian context, in 2015, the government of India launched a scheme called Stand Up India scheme. This is a very peculiar scheme. So this scheme mandates the 1.25 lakh public sector bank branches to support and handhold entrepreneurs from two categories. One, woman; second, either SC or ST. So the idea was to create collateral-free loans, handhold, give an incubation, and support these entrepreneurs. It's a work in progress. If you look at traditional occupation, the work of leather, who used to do it? The Chamar Samaj. And now who has taken it? Bata. The work of iron was done by Luhar Samaj. Now who has taken it? Tata. So a sense of dignity to the labor is very critical. You go to the West, you would see that if there is a waitress or you go to New York, it's considered disrespectful if you don't tip him and if you don't behave with him properly. So a sense of respect and a sense of dignity is very crucial. How do you regenerate that? If you look at the jhatka meat, you go to the West, you see the halal meat certification is very upwardly there. Why can't we do a similar movement in India for a jhatka certification? The majority of people who were involved in the jhatka business was from the scheduled caste community. The Khatik Samaj, the Kasai Samaj, jhatka words come from Khatik. So these traditional occupation were the sources of employment, for the source of revenue for these communities. So it's very crucial for us to reattach that sense of dignity and sense of respect to this occupation and do not look at it from a sense of indignity. Mr. Milind Kamble in Dalit Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry says capital skills caste. He says, be job givers, not job seekers, to the youngsters of the scheduled caste community. You won't believe the number of families who have benefited from it, the liberal policies. DICCI is working with Tata Affirmative Action Program, where they are mandatorily asking to procure from scheduled caste vendors. So it will take some time, because we know that after the liberalization, privatization, globalization, the opportunities in government are shrinking. You must be aware of this fact. And Dalits also must try to think beyond the comfortable and the conventional contours of the constitution. How do you think beyond the affirmative action policies? So I think your answer or your observation on how can not pure capitalism, but capitalism in the Indian context help make a level playing field, help give a sense of dignity and respect to different occupations, and further generate a movement. The second question by Yashovardhan was also a very interesting question. The Savarkarite view of Hinduism. You see, caste as an institution was attacked by majority of the imperialist forces. There were attacks on caste system by the Britishers. There were attacks on caste system by the Islamist forces. But there has to be something that this system has survived. And let me be very clear with you that till date there has been no independent academic study on the nature and composition of caste system. Whenever we speak of it, we become very agitated, and rightly so. But why not advocate for an independent analysis or an independent commission and independent study on the caste system and its different facets? What were the sociological and anthropological connotations of the caste system? We must not be running away from this fact. This is the reality. But let's analyze it academically. It's very crucial, it's very critical. There are movements. In Kerala, the government of Kerala has advocated for Dalit priests. That is also Subaltern Hindutva. Today, you tell me one thing, why did Ambedkar advocate for temple entry in Ratnagiri? It's very important. Why did Ambedkar, during the last days of his life, chooses a religion which is closest to India, which has its roots in India? We consider Buddhism as an Indic faith. In spite of having so many offers, I would say, from Islamist forces, from the missionary forces. But why he chooses a religion which is closest to India, which has its roots in India? And why after conversion, unfortunately, he dies after 50-55 days? This is again a matter of study, a matter of research. I am no one to make a value-loaded comment here. Why does he advocate for temple entry movement? So the entire bandwagon these days, Dalits are anti-Hindu, Dalits are anti-India. This must be dealt with properly. Historically, with facts, with strong arguments. Not falling in the trap of any particular narratives. The third question was asked by Ms. Pritha. There are a number of PILs. There are many initiatives in the border areas of Rajasthan who are advocating for the citizenship of groups who have migrated from Pakistan, the Bhils and the Meghwals. I don't have the exact numbers, but in the due course, whenever I find it, I'll definitely pass it on to Animesh. But I really find it very appalling when we say that CA will have an adverse impact on the Dalits of the country. It's very critical to look at it dispassionately. I have no evidence to suggest that CAA in whatever capacity will have an impact on the Dalit community. If implemented, whenever it's implemented, it will give citizenship. The process of citizenship will be expedited if you are from the persecuted community from the neighboring countries. But whenever I have the data, I'll definitely pass it on to you. The last question was Dalits are being co-opted, the Brahminical sense of society. I fail to understand. Ambedkar said that I am not against Brahmins. I am against Brahminism. मैं ब्राह्मणों के खिलाफ नहीं हूं, मैं ब्राह्मणवाद के खिलाफ हूं. So instead of making tall rhetoric claims, what I mean, it's very difficult, because you look at, this is the power structure, the power pyramid, and the power is traveling. This is the upper caste, this is the intermediary caste, and this is the lower caste, the scheduled caste, and the power is traveling. With the advent of the present government in 2019, it was somewhere midway, and it will go further down. And this transfer of process is a very natural process. You've seen it in the case of Uttar Pradesh. So unless and until you keep the subalterns at the center of your imagination, you're not going to succeed in any sphere in social space or in public life. I hope I was able to satisfy some of your concerns and some of your inquisitions that you had in your mind. But truly privileged, and I thoroughly enjoyed the interesting questions and the presentations by all of you. And thank you, Sayanji, for moderating the session as well.
It's entirely our pleasure, sir. And I hope we could sit for a longer discussion sometimes in near future. Actually, to the question, to the third question, when you responded, actually, with respect to the situation in Bengal, the community that stands out to gain the most from the CAA is the Matua community, which is again a Namashudra community which stayed back in 1946 in Bangladesh. They are followers of Harichand Thakur and Guruchand Thakur, which was a Vaishnavite, subaltern Vaishnavite movement of Eastern Bengal. And when they came during the 70s, and then later, even after 70s, when the Exodus started coming in, many of them have had problems with their citizenships, and that community is the one that stands out to gain the most, which is why.
What is the name of that community?
MATUA. And their representative, Mr. Shantanu Thakur, has this time, because of that, won elections from that constituency. By
If you're from Bengal, I'm sure you would have read about the Marit Chapi massacre.
Yeah, absolutely. So my family also migrated here during the 1946. But the catch here is that all the upper caste families migrated in 1946 because they had the means to migrate. Right? They had the land which they could sell to gain the money, and they could migrate at that time. But the lower castes had to stay back, which is why Jogendra Mandal had to stay back when he said that we have nothing to lose. But his experience was completely different. He couldn't even give the resignation letter from being there. He actually sent it across after coming to Calcutta by post.
Correct.
So,
thank you again. Thank you very much, sir, on behalf of the society for accepting our request and taking out time for us for such beautiful insight. We will trouble you again in the near future because we had such a nice session and such interesting insights. Thank you very much, sir.